Matt. Welcome, everybody, to this parallel session. My name is Matt Savas. I'm the Director of Content for the Lean Enterprise Institute. I'm joined today by Eric Ethington and Matt Zako. A brief introduction before I turn it over to our presenters. Before founding Lean Shift Consulting and becoming a coach and Lean Product Process Development Program Manager at LEI in 2016, Eric Ethington gained leadership experience implementing Lean in automotive, defense, aerospace, consumer products, and financial industries at 4 divisions of Delphi, Delphi's corporate headquarters, and Textron. Matt Zako's leadership spans numerous industries, focused on helping people transform product development, engineering, manufacturing, and service processes. Staff and management level roles include several under the guidance of former Toyota mentors for Chrysler and the University of Michigan, Gelman Sciences, Delphi, and Paul Corporation. He now serves as executive lean leader at GE Hitachi Nuclear Energy. Eric and Matt have distilled their passion for and knowledge of lean thinking and practice in product and process development, nurtured over 30 years of work experience into their book, The Power of Process, a story of innovative lean process and development. Eric and Matt, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. We'll just dive into our materials that we have here today. And we frame this presentation around 3 key questions to explore. Basically, why is this important? What does better look like? And how to get started? And so I'm going to start the conversation with why this is important. And why is this important? It really gets down to breaking what we call the engineering rework cycle. You can look this up on the lean.org site, but back in 2008, Jim Womack wrote an article about Tozen versus Kaizen, where Tozen is Kaizen that should not have been necessary. And it really resonated with Matt and I from our experience, both in our Delphi days and at various companies since, because we saw this happen, and it happened to us over and over again, where we had a plant that was doing great, doing awesome with continuous improvement activities, had a really solid vision of where they were going to go next. And along comes the new line or the new process, it gets installed, and then we just start burning money, throwing resources at it to get it working properly. It hits the floor running, and it's not running very well. So then we start reworking the brand new line, and we all celebrate and hand out trophies at the end of it because everybody does do the heroics. But the problem is we're doing that, we're getting behind on other things, and the next line is coming up. And so it was one of these things that really, kind of inspired and both bothered us over the years, as far as, why are we having to rework these brand new lines? Why don't we do them well right up front? And the importance of doing them well up front really is illustrated in a couple of graphics on this slide. One is that development just has this tremendous influence on cost. Even though development might only be 5-8% in a traditional costing system, 70 to 80% of your cost and actually even your quality and delivery potential get locked in as soon as the design starts to solidify. And that translates into the later the timing goes in the program, your cost to modify goes up exponentially, and your ability to impact actually has a limit. You can only touch so much of the cost because it gets locked in. And what does that really mean? I'm going to pass this over to Matt to talk about the opportunities that we're missing.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So to finish out that first question here, why this is important, and actually I think it's a great place why we need to start with this, even though we're jumping to the end of, what this could look like. But early on in the efforts, it's important to get people's attention. And this, so Eric, as Matt Savas mentioned, Eric and I have been doing this for a combined 60 years, and we've seen numerous examples, and we've taken one specific one and made it into a case study. And this is the example from that case study, where a team that came up with 8 different concepts, but using this lean process creation approach, if they hadn't done it, they would have ended up with concept number 1, and it would have been a cost of X over 10 years. And by using the logic and, basically investing the time and the energy with the right approach up front, they're able to avoid almost $6 million worth of cost over 10 years for just under, $600,000 of investment. So it's a 10x payback. And that when you hear people say that doing this proper up front process development work, the 10x, and this is where it comes from when we demonstrate it with this case study with real data. Again, this was a real example. So the other key piece of this is we talk about quality, delivery, cost, but the big thing is we want to launch a process that also is meaningful work for the people doing the work. And too often we would see processes that would launch that had disrespectful work or poor work in it, poor ergonomics, high risk work, poor safety, those type of efforts. So doing this upfront, we can quantify that as well. But the key thing here is we need to have a scorecard to show why this is important whenever you're doing this type of work. And we like to use this example to show that this was a real team. They invested this time and energy up front, and they got a 10x payback. So they basically, another way to look at it is they spent about $600,000 extra in the process that was being developed, and they were given a $600,000 check for the next 9 or 10 years. So it's pretty powerful when it's done right. And we've seen this play out over and over in our career when it is done correctly. But yet it is tough to get people's attention and do this when in the previous slide Eric showed with the toes on that people get wrapped up in the rework and they don't have time to do this early interventional work upstream in the process. Thanks. We can go to the next. Yeah. So next we'll, now that we've talked about why it's so important, what does better look like, right? What does it typically look like, and what does better look like? So we can go to the next slide. So again, in our experience doing this is in automotive and so many different other industries, the model is probably not a surprise to many, but what we have is just a simple 6CON model, we call it. And the key thing here is there's really 2 high-level phases when you're doing development, whether it's product development or process development. We're talking process development, today, but it's the learning and executing. And it sounds simple, but it's an important distinction to make, as you can see in the model with the line down the middle. The learning part of the process development is it's a heuristic. It's not a deterministic phase. It's a heuristic, right? There's lots of learning, and it's key during this phase to identify risks and knowledge gaps. So that's the front half of this during the learning, and the execution on the right side is where we start to we want to we've got all the risks minimized, the knowledge gaps closed, and Eric's going to touch on the back half. I will go through each of the steps on the front half here, but all this depends on great people, a cross-functional team, chief process engineer or a chief engineer helping lead the team. We're talking a lot about process, but it is all about people and capable people developing these processes, and again, designing meaningful work for a group of people that are going to be doing these in some industries for decades. So you pivot. Yes, thanks, Eric. So with the first con, again, of the 6CON model, early on is the context. So this framework is, you think of it like chapters in a book. As you're doing process development, context is the first frame of the first chapter, and you can align around this. And the key thing here is understand value. There's many people involved, and they're going to use this process. There's customers that are going to receive the product or the service that you're designing, right? There's the people doing the work. There's investors. There's members of the community. If you're in a healthcare system, there could be patients and their families. Could be partners, vendors. So all these people make a big giant Venn diagram, right? So we need to understand all those parameters, what value is, and we want to hit that sweet spot in the middle that will optimize it for everyone. So early on, it's important to define that context and also identify big risks, big knowledge gaps that could derail the project, and early on address those, or once the team gets going, it could derail the project. So this is part of the discovery or exploratory phase of process development, even before the learning phase, probably. And also there's an important piece called the operational declaration, and similar to a concept paper, where you want to capture all the knowns and unknowns and the value, and keep that as your requirements document for the team as you move through. So the key thing here is this: making the right decisions at the right time throughout the development process. That gives you a huge competitive advantage. So we can pivot to the next. So again, one of the early important things in the model that I touched on with the scorecard just before is as you navigate through your process development phases and frames, however you call them, we're using the 6CON model here. You need to have a scorecard. right? To tell good from bad, or to compare options, tell abnormal from normal. Otherwise, there's too much emotion, too much subjective discussion. So one of the challenges when you're doing this is we can say step one is want to start with the business case targets. When you're with the team early on. So what is the business case target? And then we want to go all the way upstream. So we want to take those metrics from the back and work our way up, and then measure progress as we're going through the 6 Con model. So an example here is like, let's say your business case has a cost, a unit cost target at the end. Well, early on in the development, you don't know what the unit cost is going to be. You don't know what the material could be, right? You don't know how many people will be in it. So as you move upstream, so one step upstream from the cost, you may be measuring productivity as you get closer to launch. Upstream from there, as you select materials, machines, you may be looking at the machine material balance that you have in your process. How well utilized is the equipment? How well utilized are the people, right? And then further upstream, early on, we have a forecast. We're not sure if it's going to hold. We also don't know how much investment we want to make if the customer is not, fully committed to this. So we want to have capacity, flexibility, and an effective labor efficiency model. So what that could look like in your scorecard is to have measures that look at those 2 type of aspects. In this case, effective labor efficiency and then capacity, flexibility. So on the right side, just what's highlighted is concept number 3 that was developed by the team has 5 different speeds it can run at to hit customer demand, whereas the first concept was just running at one rate, and it also had much lower labor efficiency. And as I mentioned, you can also add, and you should add, ergonomics, other assessment criteria as you mature your model. But that cost scorecard is going to be very, very critical to be able to tell good from bad early on. So, all right, go to the next. So once we got a clear understanding of the context, the value stream end to end, the next step is to start getting into concepts, generating multiple ideas, process, not locking into one, but really this is where in order to start to get to testing and comparing, we first have to generate all these different options and alternatives. So first thing is here is, come up with as many ways as possible. We say more than 3 here. It could be 50 different ways, could be 40 different ways. It doesn't matter, but we say more than 3. Why? Because when we have 3, we tend to pick each extreme and then something right in the middle between the 2. So this really challenges our thinking to stretch, get as many as possible within reason. And then we also want just make a point. You want to have some structure and guardrails to not go too far off into the extremes. Although those extremes can also test your thinking and challenge your mental models. But again, during this phase, you're really starting to generate ideas, concepts, and actually building off multiple ideas. You may come up with 3, and from those 3, you may generate 2 more. So, but the key thing here, the competitive advantage is you really generate some knowledge and take the blinders off and open up the thinking. So we can go to the next. So in this, just it's simple. This is keeping with our case study that we're sharing here today. The case study, the team actually generated 8 different options. They generated a lot more than that, but 8 that they brought down to a scorecard level. And the interesting thing is, in the case study, again, this is real situation. They were going to launch option number 1, which would have been a highly feasible model using the traditional model, and then going to the second concept, which was a huge improvement. The team felt like they had generated and exhausted all their improvement, but each iteration that they did brought new improvements, again, in safety, quality, lead time to the end-to-end system, and cost. It didn't just focus on cost. So it was really great in this example to see that, and those results again led to not just almost $6 million in savings, but huge ergonomics, more meaningful work, and much more benefits than just the cost. So we'll pivot now to the next phase. So after, again, we've gone through the context, you've generated a bunch of concepts. It's time to start converging, right? To test, compare, contrast, battle out all these different ideas that you've generated. So here, this is where you're doing much deeper learning and challenging of ideas. If you're in a healthcare system, a manufacturing system, you can mock things up physically, tabletop, use real physical prototypes, examples to test and learn, that you can touch. Nowadays, simulation is very, far advanced. Virtual simulation, 3D simulations, you can use that, but we definitely encourage physical mock-ups and prototyping of the workspaces to really do the deep learning. And then you'll definitely, there'll be also a phase where you'll diverge in here, right, as well, but it doesn't just go naturally 4 to 2 to 1, and as we're showing here. But the end goal is here, we want to get to with a cross-functional team that from, manufacturing, the people actually doing the work on the front lines to the design team, to stay aligned on what learning needs to be challenged and tested to best meet the customer goals and the value that we define during that context phase. So I talked on earlier before. So after we get through the converge phase, the learning should be ramping down. We should be minimizing the risk, closing out knowledge gaps, really, challenging how are we going to get this cycle time? We should have a better idea how to do that. As we go through this, minimizing those risks and knowledge gaps, we start to pivot into the execution phase. And the key thing here is I wanted to mention on the right side, I know it's kind of small, but Eric mentioned this earlier, the ability to impact early on is much greater in this learning phase, which is, way upstream. And what we found is, right, when teams are doing, rework or toes end work on the far right, what ends up happening is they don't have the ability to spend time in that phase up front. But the key thing to remember is it costs a lot more as you get closer to launch to fix things, and you put the customer at risk and the whole business and business plan at risk for that. With that, I'll turn it back over to Eric to go into the back half.
Okay, thanks, Matt. The next phase in this is configure, and that's that detailed work of putting all the pieces together. We take that loose concept, and now we really have to make everything come together. And one of the things to remember here is we're configuring a value stream. We're not just configuring what I call a process. Sometimes we lose sight or don't get the total benefit of this development work when we think we just need to get some workplaces and machines to work together. We want to actually be able to put a signal in one end and have a part come out the other end, or a surface, or whatever it is that we're working on. The one advantage of configure is it ensures detailed learning occurs and incorporates that learning into the value stream design. And configure is not just the operator methods and machine interfaces. It also gets into all that material and information flow, process by process. It considers everything to make the value stream function. So it is the work that might happen in a workplace, but it's also how are you dealing with common and unique parts? What are routes looking like? Do we have enough room for all the materials? How do the materials come in and the empty containers go out? How do the signals flow? It's all of that detail work and figuring out how that's going to actually execute. After that, the next we get into is confirm. At this point, we're starting to install stuff, and we're preparing for launch. And if you remember Matt mentioning those stakeholders up front, we're really kind of completing the PDCA cycle, the plan, do, check, adjust cycle, with emphasis now in confirm on check and adjust. It's going to reveal value stream problems early before launch, enabling the team to more effectively launch at the different planned capabilities. And this confirm, a foundational to it is establishing an actual confirmation plan that is a series of trial runs that get more and more, have more and more rigor to them, test the value stream in new and different ways, and have higher and higher levels of scrutiny as you get closer to launch. And by doing this allows time for any remaining problems that haven't been figured out at this point to vet those or make those visible and solve them again before you hit the start of providing your product or service. That finally brings us around to continuously improve, which is the last phase or lens that we describe. The reality is nothing's perfect. So we're not trying to get people to think that you do this and you have perfect processes. There's no such thing. And even if it was perfect, things change. Model mixes change, parts, you get new suppliers, people change. There's all these factors always changing. And so you always are going to have to do continuous improvement, but now you're doing it starting at a much higher level of capability. And so now you're making great processes even better. And one of the advantages this offers is it creates new knowledge in the Gemba that can be applied to future process development efforts. So we create that actual new knowledge that when we go to do the next iteration of process development, we start at yet an even higher level instead of the story I was sharing at the beginning where in comes the line and it's actually less sophisticated and has less lean thinking built into it than the stuff that we had on the plant floor. And we see that happen all the time. The new stuff hasn't captured this knowledge from continuous improvement to bring that back up front. The last couple things here is just how to get started and a little bit on some resources. Getting started, one of the things to think about is decide who's going to own the activity and run the first pilot. It says on the slide, think chief engineer or value stream manager. Sometimes we call the person a system architect, but it's really somebody who's going to help lead or orchestrate the team through this. And they almost have two jobs. One is to lead them through and orchestrate this activity on a very specific process development. But the other thing is to document that process so that it can be replicated and you can think about how to spread it within the organization. Ideally, this is not a one-time thing. This is something that you learn, and you almost do a PDCA on that too. The second thing is determine the current state of your process for creating new processes. We always suggest mapping a recent process development effort. Map it out and start to understand what worked, what didn't, where were the wastes, where were the rework loops, what were the issues, and how did it perform at launch, and what was all the effort that had to go into it to get it up to the performance levels that were expected. Establish your target date vision for lean process creation. We suggest learn from this model. There's a lot of good content in it. How it manifests itself in each of your organizations can be slightly different. But there's a lot there to be learned from. It's just really a logical flow of how you start with, a goal in mind, and then how you bring that through to reality. And then define leadership's role in the process. What is their role in supporting this process when conditions are working and things are normal? What is their role when abnormalities come up? How do they engage? How do they provide helpful help to the team? So these are just a few basic questions to consider to get started. To help you out with more, just a few resources. On the left, there's a website you can go to. There's a blog in there that has been put up in the last couple of days that just literally contains nothing but links to some existing content. One is a Planet Lean series. You can also go to the Planet Lean site and find this series. It's 8 articles that Matt and I did on this very topic. One on the competitive advantage. The next 6 of them were following each chunk of the model, and then the last one was in getting started. Much like the flow of this presentation, there's also an LEI webinar and a CONnexus webinar that there's links. The LEI webinar is more general about the flow of this. The CONnexus is talking about the role of the system architect and what their job really is. And then, small investment, as Matt Savas mentioned at the outset of this, we did do a book on this, and a lot of this thinking is tied into that book. So with that, Matt and I just wanted to thank you, and we'll turn this back over to Matt Savas to help us if there's any questions here.
Thanks, Matt and Eric. And we do have a few minutes for some Q&A. So if you have questions for Matt and Eric, just post them in the chat, and I'll be sure to look out for those. But I'll get things started here. I do want to tie some of the content into the guiding principles of lean product and process development, 6 guiding principles that you can find on lean.org. At the start of the presentation, Eric and Matt, you mentioned that word tozen, the idea that rework that should never have been necessary. And one of the guiding principles you refer to in lean product and process development is knowledge reuse. What are some effective methods you've seen around knowledge reuse that can eliminate some of that tozen, that unnecessary rework, because we just forgot as an organization what we had done in the past? Maybe I'll start with Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, no, one thing you can definitely do, or just to plan on doing reflection, Hansai, during your development process, for doing, if we don't plan it out, it's not going to happen. So doing that reflection and that, or like after action reviews from, like the military aspect, doing that forces you to do the learning and reuse the knowledge and capture it. Too often we may wait till the end of the program, right? We're trying to launch this thing. It's late. We don't have time to think back what went wrong because we're late to go to the next process. But that's one thing that definitely you can do is when you start out doing your development is to put in those reflection points. But also as you're kicking off your next development cycle, to do what Eric said, is think back to the last one you did. And, you can spend a day with the team and actually map out how the previous one went and challenge, what are we going to do differently? Sometimes the business drives you to do this anyway. Eric and I, early in our career, we both had to do development projects with Toyota, for Toyota, and we had to figure out how to do things in, 2/3 of the time with the same amount of people. So it was, sometimes that is the urgency that drives it too.
Can you talk more about that urgency? I mean, there's the sort of Elon Musk style of saying that we're going to do the impossible in 2 weeks. And then there's something different that Toyota does. They apply a sense of urgency and get people to do amazing things. What's the difference? What is Toyota doing around that? That's different from just executives saying, you got 2 weeks, make it happen.
Yeah, I think it's using fear versus using creativity is probably one good way to. Eric, you have any comments on that?
Well, I would just say that it certainly involves more than just bringing a sleeping bag to work to mentor people. And so, Matt and I's experience in this is when we were working with Yamada-san, he wasn't giving us, this is going to sound like something out of Managing to Learn, the book, but he wasn't giving us the answers, but he was right there with us, helping us learn and figure this stuff out. And it was actually, I've often told people, if you're not having fun doing this, you're probably not doing it right. And it was always fun and energizing the way this was. And so it was like, boy, there was a lot of demands, but it was really fulfilling because you felt yourself really learning as you're going through it.
We have time, I think, for one more question here, and it's from the audience. They're starting to pile in now. It's unfortunate as we close. But I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Madhu asks, what would you say that 6Con provides organization? Would you say that 6Con provides organizations a good framework to guide their digital transformation efforts for their primary/enabling value stream organizations? So how does it work for digital environments?
I think it would work just fine. I'll be honest, in our book, you're going to have to extrapolate and change some of the nouns that are in the book because it's, it'll sound manufacturing oriented. But that was one of the things Matt and we had to kind of hold ourselves back because we're like, oh, this could work in healthcare. This could work here. This could work here. Because it is really starting about first understanding the stakeholders, the primary, secondary, tertiary stakeholders, and what are their needs and defining those needs into something you can measure. And then it's coming up with multiple concepts that can fulfill those. One trap that we often fall into is we don't have that set-based mentality. And so we come up with a concept and we just keep iterating. And we have that one concept. And so if you imagine that U-shaped cell that was number 2, we just keep making the U-shaped cell better and better and better. And we leave a lot of capability on the table. And so, again, same type of thing. And then running some experiments. There's some companies that do a real nice job in the digital world of running experiments with multiple versions of user interfaces. Don't just do one, do multiple and see what works and doesn't work and have some measures around that. And now down select to, okay, what's my user interface going to look like? How's my data going to be stored? Get into that. And then now, okay, let's really write this thing. That's you get into configuring it. And so I think it all applies. You just might have to change the nouns out.
feel like Hopin could have used one or two more user interface configurations in their product design to help some things out. So that wraps us. We're 1 minute over. Thank you so much, Eric and Matt, for joining us. I know it's getting late here on the East Coast. So thank you for joining, and thanks to everybody for participating in the parallel session here.
Okay, thanks
Farewell.
for having us in.
Thank you.